Hi everybody, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and this is my discussion of Poets in a Landscape by Gilbert Highet, an absolutely outstanding book. It is I tried to describe it to some of my friends as I was reading it over the course of the past week. I was reading a chapter a night, and I said, it's like if you took all the best parts and then, of different genres, travel writing, biography, history, literary criticism, and then poetry itself, and then combined all of them, art criticism, and combined all of them by just an absolute masterful writer and thinker. That's what this book is. I joked, for those who are young enough to have ever sampled these, I said it's like if you got a Lunchable from a 3-star Michelin restaurant. Lunchables are disgusting. So, but they have a little bit of everything, and that's what this book has. So it focuses on 7 Roman poets: Catullus, Virgil, Horace, Ovid, Propertius, Tibullus, who was new to me, Juvenal. I think I got everybody. Yeah. And then the 8th chapter is just about Rome. And for each writer, we get translations of their poetry by Highet, who's outstanding. The translations are also quite strong. I really enjoyed them. We get a bit of biography about the poet, often from the poet's own work. So what we can know from the poet's own work. But then we get this really cool part. And this was probably my favorite part of each chapter, where Highet actually went with his wife, who was Dorothy McKines? I think Helen McKines, who was a writer of spy novels. They would go together. This is kind of like in the late 1940s, early 1950s. They would go together to Italy and then go to the different places that the poets had been born at, or had a villa at, or ostensibly had a tomb at. Of course, he spent a lot of time in Rome. And so he tells us what it's like to be in the landscape. That's the title is, he's talking about these poets, but he's also talking about their homes, where they grew up, what they look like now, the history of it, how, once it was a Roman village, and then it became sort of like a town of maybe 10, 20,000 people. And then the Dark Ages occurred, and, and plagues occurred. And so during the Middle Ages, instead of this little village down in this valley, up on this mountain, they built this castle fortress. And then as that fell into disrepair, it actually became a church. And now there's only about 2,000 people who live in sort of a village farming in that area. And so it's really interesting. The travelogue aspect was absolutely fascinating. And then we get some criticism around the poetry. He actually shows actual transliterations of lines of Horace to show how Horace will put basically drop an important part of the line or subject part of that stanza in between other words that sort of create this cognitive dissonance, I guess, as a reader is how I would describe it. And so it was absolutely fantastic. So there were 7 poets, then the final chapter is Rome. So what I did was each night over the past week, I would sit and read one of the chapters. Some of them, like Virgil and Horace, have pretty substantial chapters. Tibullus, Propertius, even Ovid were much shorter. Juvenal, much shorter. And then the final chapter was just about Rome, the architecture of Rome, the history of Rome, the way the different poets perceive Rome. So I absolutely loved this book. I'm not going to go reread all of my Roman poets, but I kind of was pulling volumes off the shelf as I navigated my way through the poets. And I think what I'm going to do is, as I read those over the course of the next 2 years, maybe. Let's see if I can discipline myself to wait that long. As I read those, I think I'll return to this book and reread those biographies and the criticism and the travelogue around the different poets. But I wanted to give a sample. So I have this section from Propertius, I think isn't as well known as certainly Virgil or Ovid, but even probably Catullus or Horace. So north of Rome, the land changes. It becomes richer and more fertile, but also bolder and stranger. The rocky Apennine backbone of Italy sends out curving ribs and throws up harsh vertebrae of stone. There are high ridges of hill, with cool glens and forests among them. There are fruitful plains, often commanded by steep spurs of rock, which have always made splendid natural fortresses. It is not an easy country to travel through, even now. It was hard for conquerors in the past to unite it or to dominate and assimilate it. The Romans themselves scarcely succeeded in doing so after centuries of tough fighting. Later, in the Middle Ages, it was broken up among dozens of small, feuding communities, each with its own fortress center, its own walls, castle, flag, and history. It is not united to this day, but it is full of rich individuality, of glorious traditions, and of noble art. And so we have just like, he then goes into the different, Sextus Persius is one of the strangest of Latin poets. I remember that when I was in college, I fell ill and was in hospital for many weeks in order to keep my Latin from growing rusty. As soon as I began to be able to sit up and read, I asked my parents to send in a plain text of Propertius, the poems alone, without explanatory notes. I expected to read slowly and meditatively through it, without the interference of any editor, as one might read Keats or Lamartine. Already I knew something about Propertius and could even repeat some of his most famous lines. The book arrived. I opened it eagerly and began the first poem, a poem dedicated to his friend Tullus, and telling of his cruel and painful love for the woman he called Cynthia. Cynthia first enslaved me with her fatal eyes. I had been uninfected by desire, but then love made me lower my proud, unwavering gaze, and placed his tyrannous foot upon my head, remorseless, training me to hate all virtuous girls, and lead a purposeless and wanton life. Now for a year this madness has afflicted me, and still I live like a damned soul in hell. A fine poem so far, I thought, and very sympathetic for a young man of romantic inclinations. First love directed toward a beautiful, arrogant, cruel woman who bewitched Propertius, perverted his mind, and refused to make him happy. And it goes on, he goes, I moved on to the following couplets. Melanion, by accepting every trial, Tullus, broke the hard will of cruel Iasus, for now he wandered mindless in Parthenian caves, and roamed among the shaggy savage beasts, and further, wounded by the oak branch of Helios, he groaned and writhed on the Arcadian rocks. Therefore he gained the power to tame the Lightfoot girl. Prayers and service have such power in love. Back to Highet now. To me this meant almost nothing whatever. Tullus, I learned from other poems, was clearly a friend in whom Propertius was confiding. But who were Melanion and Iasus and Helios? They were all utterly unknown to me, and I could scarcely see any real connection between this passage and the beautifully strong and vivid opening lines of the poem. And so he goes on to talk about the idea of we get into the criticism, so we get some translation, we get some biography, we get some geography. He goes on at one point and he's talking about these really beautiful waters that are in this sort of like hometown of Propertius. The surface of the springs can never be still. It breaks and breathes as new water is born from below, and the whole streams incessantly towards the riverbed. Delicate waterflies ply above it in the sunlight, and white butterflies. Birds chirp in the tranquil branches. Hens drink thoughtfully. In the farmyard, its roots fed by the underground water, a huge old fig tree grows. Beside the spring are edges of blossoming thyme and big bunches of canna reeds. And he goes, there is no noise, but there is in the water and in the air a ceaseless happy whisper, as though kind spirits inhabited the place. Another poet might have written exquisite poetry about the springs of Clitumnus. Not Propertius. Throughout most of his life, love appeared to him the only thing worth writing of. And so we just have, it's a wonderful book. It truly is wonderful. And I was introduced to Tibullus, who I had never heard of. And this was the final stanza of one of his poems. Now, friends, sing praise to love's great Godhead. Summon him to help our herds, and secretly ourselves. No, openly and unashamed, our prayers are drowned by jolly shouts and squealing clarinets. Sing, dance, hurrah! Already night is harnessing her chariot. Dancing golden stars appear, and after them will come, silent on wings of darkness, sleep and black dreams on hesitating feet. So this is just an extraordinary work. It closes with, in Rome, Catullus said this was his home, far more than his northern birthplace. Virgil shunned it because he shunned crowds and hated pomp, yet he loved to dwell on the city in his imagination, and in his greatest poem he portrayed it both as a simple prehistoric settlement and, in anticipation, as the imperial home of Augustus the Peacemaker. Propertius and Tibullus both loved its adventurous gaiety, and Ovid's Art of Love is an amorous guide to the metropolis. Horace formed his talent as a satirist and philosopher while walking through its busy streets, and still, even when withdrawn in his country seclusion, thought of his friends in the city with pleasure. Juvenal described its mansions, its temples, and its slums with fascinated repulsion. These and many other Roman poets communicate to us the deathless nobility, not only of Italy, but of its captain city, Rome. The history is alive. The stones are dead. The history is alive, running through our hearts and through our minds. Walking among the stupendous ruins, we still feel the power of the Romans and the tragedy of their failure. So Highet's an amazing, amazing companion to wander through Italy with, to wander through history with, to spend time with these poets. It is just an absolute delight. He apparently wrote a book called The Art of Teaching, which I now want to read because he just seems like a fabulous teacher and someone I would like to learn from sort of in that level. I have been sort of digging out, I've got Ovid's Heroides, which I've been reading some of the letters to my kids at night as their bedtime story. I have volumes, that's my Penguin Classics. I have the complete poems of Catullus and the Odes of Horus. Now this is all translated by Guy Lee, but it's cool. It has a parallel Latin text. I don't speak Latin or read Latin, but this almost makes me want to try to. And the Odes of Horus, this volume's cool. There's a lot of different translators in this volume. And so John Dryden, Ben Jonson, Samuel Johnson, just a huge number of different translators pop up throughout this, poets or translators that I've never heard of, but just really fantastic. The Portable Roman Reader has a bunch of different translators for Catullus specifically. So Sir Philip Sidney, Lord Byron, and Jonathan Swift all translate poems by Catullus in here. And so it was just a real delight to read. I think I've acquired a copy of Propertius. We'll see. I'm still looking for Tibullus. If anybody's read Tibullus and has a recommendation on an edition, please let me know. This was Poets in a Landscape by Gilbert Highet, one that I will be returning to and returning to and returning to and walking with next time I go to Italy, and I don't know when that will be, but we had a great time in Italy for our second anniversary, my wife and I, and Rome was part of that. And so if I get a chance to go back, Highet's coming with me. So thank you, everyone.